to another video by Liminal Spaces. So, we are going back to Isaac Asimov, More I, Robot, which is tons of fun. I have read the second story. It's called Runaround, and it's a very important story for Isaac Asimov. Runaround was first published in 1942 in Astounding Science Fiction, I believe is the name of the magazine. And that puts it right after Robbie. And it is the first time the three laws of robotics are firmly talked about and defined. So it makes it a very important story for science fiction in general. It's very, very influential on all kinds of science fiction. And this brings me to another point that I should have brought up in the last Asimov video, which is the positronic brain. Asimov created the idea of a positronic brain that a robot would have. It's completely fictional, but Star Trek jumped on it. In fact, in an early Next Generation Star Trek episode, they literally talk about Isaac Asimov and how proud he would have been of knowing that data can exist with a positronic brain because Isaac Asimov brought up the original idea. And that's pretty cool, I think, to make Asimov part of Star Trek lore. And of course, I came about it backwards, right? I would assume it's the opposite for someone who really loved Isaac Asimov back in the 50s and the 60s, and then to be able to see the Next Generation and to hear Isaac Asimov being mentioned in the first place, suggesting, of course, that he lives in Star Trek times, and also to have the positronic brain actually become a reality, I think would have been very cool for an Asimov fan. Whereas for me, it's the opposite. Whereas a Star Trek fan, I'm like, oh, that's cool. They talk about Asimov. He must be cool, right? It's kind of the opposite for me. But that's a huge deal. And that's first mentioned in Robbie. And it's also mentioned, of course, in this story, Speedy. In fact, all of the robots in this story have positronic brains. And Robbie also has a positronic brain. Completely made up thing, but it's become an inherent part of science fiction all the way around, just like the three laws. Of course, Star Trek doesn't explicitly talk about the three laws of robotics, but I'm sure if they have an episode where somebody builds a robot, they would say, and they may have already done this, but I'm sure that they would say, the robot's programmed so that it can't hurt humans, of course. This story was surprisingly good. I really, the first time I read this book, I was a bit disappointed. And I believe that the reason that that happened is because I was expecting to be reading something like Ray Bradbury. I was expecting something with a lot more heart. I love the science in these stories, but there is a distinct lack of heart in these stories. Being that I have Strange New Worlds, which is pure heart, I swear. Being that I have that and I'm watching that, and we just watched The Last Airbender, the remake of that. We got through all those episodes, which was tons of fun, by the way. And that's just full of heart. I've had so much heart in the entertainment that I've been consuming that reading this was kind of a breath of fresh air. It was kind of nice to have something that wasn't so focused on heart, but had a lot of fun science. So it's like I've been saying, it's okay to make different kinds of Star Trek if you have traditional Star Trek available as well. And I feel like the same thing is happening here. It's okay to have science fiction that is mostly about the science if I have other science fiction that's mostly about heart. So I was really pleased by this second story. I really had a good time, which really surprised me. It is a very basic story, which there's nothing wrong with. I'll kind of go over the plot right now. You got these two scientists that are kind of famous. People know of their reputation, they know how smart they are, and they know how good they are at fixing problems. And they are sent to Mercury because Mercury is a problem. Mercury's kind of cursed. They bring up in the story that anytime they try to do something on Mercury, it doesn't work. So it's getting this reputation as a real problem planet. So, of course, they send these two scientists there because they know how to deal with problems. So, the first problem that they have to solve is they need to make sure that their reflectors, the protectors that they have on the planet to protect them from the sun's glare, are working. And the only way that they can work is if they have this specific chemical that they put inside of them, I guess, that makes them work. One thing I do need to point out is I am no genius scientist like the people in this book are, or like Isaac Asimov was, right? He had a massive IQ and he knew about science. He constantly studied and he constantly learned, and I am nowhere near that. So the things I'm going to describe, I'm not going to describe them well, right? They're better left to Isaac Asimov. But they need this specific chemical to go into these reflectors so that the sun doesn't completely bake them. Mercury, of course, is tidally locked, which means it always has one side that faces the sun and one side that doesn't face the sun. They are on the sunny side, so they really need these protectors. The chemical that they need is in liquid pools on Mercury. It's not too hard for them to get. So they have a robot named Speedy, and they give the robot the orders to run out to a pool of this specific chemical that's on Mercury, grab some of it, and bring it back so they can put it in their reflectors so that they're protected. That's the first thing they got to do once they've only been there for one day. So it's all right. They go ahead and they send out the robot. All of this happens before the story starts. The story starts kind of at the climax, which is okay. It's a short story, right? We don't need too much ramping up to get there. I wish we had a little bit of ramping up only because this story is packed with exposition. There is so much information that's just being dumped, and these characters are saying things to each other that they know, right? It's a tiny bit awkward. It's not the most well written story, but it's a fun subject, so that's not a problem, right? So the story starts with one of the scientists running down. It's also hard to tell the scientists apart. There's not much difference in them, although I do think Asimov does a better job in this than Philip K. Dick does most of the time. He tries to describe them. One of them has crazy red hair, and the other one is very formal and direct, right? So we've got this separation. One kind of flies off the handle, and one's very controlled. I still halfway through, I was confused about who was talking. The one with the crazy red hair comes running downstairs, and he's like, "We're in so much trouble." And the controlled guy's like, "Why? What's happening?" And he's like, "The robot hasn't come back. Speedy hasn't come back. Speedy is the only robot they have. And if something's happened to Speedy, then they won't be able to get the chemical that they need and they will fry. And they have like 12 hours, I think, before they die. So the stakes are pretty high, which is cool. There's no one in the vicinity of Mercury. They are the only two that are there, and they were sent there specifically to fix this problem because they are the problem solvers. So they bring Speedy with them, thinking that'll take care of it, and Speedy doesn't come back. So they're in real trouble. So he says, the controlled scientist says, "Have you tried to contact Speedy?" And the other person says, "Yes, I tried to contact him, but as you know, the radio won't work over 12 miles on the sunny side, and Speedy is more than 12 miles away. Now, I don't know why the radio doesn't work. That really piqued my interest. It's very cool. I hope that that's true. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but it makes me wonder, like, do radio waves have trouble when it's that hot? I don't know. That's very interesting. I find that kind of shocking and weird. I wonder if it has more to do with the machine that's putting out the radio waves than the actual waves themselves. I'm not sure. That's a very interesting point that this book makes, which I hope is true. That's cool. Um, so they can't contact Speedy by radio. He does say, I've checked the tracker and Speedy is still moving. And Speedy is moving in a circle around the pool that we sent him to. And the controlled guy's like, that's interesting. Okay. The red haired guy just wants to give up. You know, he's very passionate and explosive. And he's like, it's all over. We're doomed. And the controlled scientist says, now, wait a minute. There are 4 or 5 robots. I think actually there's 6 robots downstairs that the old company used to use before everything fell apart. And I don't know why everything fell apart. They don't go into that. But he says, we should go downstairs and check out those robots. And the guy's like, okay, sounds good. So they go downstairs and they realize they give the robots power. They put these spheres into their chests that have nuclear power in them. And that gives them the power they need to wake up. So he wakes up all 6 robots and he goes and talks to the first one. And he says, can you go outside? And the robot says, yes, I can go outside. The Mercury sun never bothers me. So that's cool. He says, good. I want you to go outside and I want you to go to this area and you're going to see a robot there and I want you to grab it and bring it back. And the robot says, okay. And doesn't do anything. And the guy's like, okay, go get him. And he says, I can't go because you're not on my back. And he puts his hands in a cupped position like you would to help somebody get up on a horse. And he puts them down so that the human can get in his hands. These robots are about 12 feet tall. And he wants the human to put his foot in this stirrup that he's created with his hands so he can pick him up and put him on his back. And we go into some exposition, of course. There's been exposition all through this about the world and all that kind of stuff, which a writer needs. I just feel like it's a little clumsy in this, but here's where we get to one. The scientist says, oh, of course, they had a very hard time building these robots on Earth because everyone was afraid of them. So one of the safety precautions that they built into the robot is the robot cannot move unless it has a human on its back. And that was a little weird to me. I like the bold choice. That's interesting. But it's a little bit funky because it is human shaped, right? They didn't make it dog shaped or horse shaped or centaur shaped, right? They could have given it 6 legs, 4 legs so a human could sit comfortably on its back, and then 2 arms so that it could still do work. It's weird. They have to sit up on the shoulders with their legs down, and they gave them a hump, so at least it's a comfortable sitting position. And then they have pointy ears, so the human can grab the ears, I guess, to steer or at least hold on. So it's interesting. That's a weird choice. I kind of like it, but it's kind of weird. It's cool. So okay. The only way this robot can go out and catch the other robot is if the human is sitting on its back. So they have to get their sun protector suits. Their sun protector suits only last about 20 minutes in direct sunlight. So this is another obstacle they have to deal with. They put on their sun protector suits, they get on the backs of the robots, and they go there's a bunch of tunnels. They can't just go outside. They were just going to take the robot upstairs, send it out the door, and have it go. But the problem, of course, is the sun. So they realize, ooh, this is a mining operation. There's tunnels everywhere. So they find a tunnel that gets as close to Speedy as they can get, at least to the circle that Speedy's making. They find a tunnel that goes there and has an opening, and they go down the tunnel. So they follow the tunnel, and luckily, where they pop out onto the surface of Mercury is in the shade. There's a giant cliff that's blocking the sun. So they have shade. And because it's tidally locked, that shade will never leave. It's not like on Earth, where as the sun travels, the shadows move, right? It's always the same. There's a shadow there. They're fine. So they pop out in this shadow, very lucky, and they see the edge of the shadow. They're going to have to go in the sun to go look for Speedy, but they have a safe point where they can sit. And I'm not sure why they needed this, because they could always just go back down in the hole. But once again, it's fun science, right? It's cool to think about tidally locked Mercury and shadows and things like that. So they're in a shadow. They feel lucky. They go to the edge of the shadow and they use their binoculars and they can see Speedy. So they're like, okay, we're going to have to go out in the sun. Speedy's coming towards them, but his circle will not, he doesn't come all the way to the shadow. He's going to turn in his circle. So they have to go out. They ride out into the sun and they get to the point where they can contact Speedy over the radio. So they call Speedy and they say, Speedy, come here. And Speedy starts talking all this weird gibberish, quotes from books and quotes from musicals and just crazy, weird nonsense. And then finally says, you're going to have to catch me. And Speedy turns around and goes tearing off. And they're like, what the heck? So they turn around and go back to the shadow, and they think about it for a little bit, and they realize that Speedy is acting drunk, basically. And why would Speedy do that? Why would Speedy act drunk? And they realize that it's because of the three laws. The first law says a robot can never hurt a human. And the second law says you have to do exactly what humans tell you unless it contradicts the first law. And the third law says you have to protect yourself unless it contradicts the second law or the third law. Speedy is acting drunk because the three laws are messing with his brain. So the very controlled scientist turns to the red-haired guy and says, what exactly did you tell Speedy? And he says, I told Speedy to go out to the pool, collect some of the stuff, and bring it back. And the controlled scientist says, just like that, with no urgency. And he says, yeah, just like that, just flat. There was no need for urgency. He's a robot. He's going to do it as fast as he can, period. And he says, I think that's the problem. The third law says a robot can't hurt itself. So the fact that there was no urgency in your message has created this contradiction. You told him to do something, but there's something here that's going to hurt him. So that contradiction has put him in this weird loop where he's trying to do what you told him to do, but he's also got to protect himself. There's some danger out there that we don't know, that we're not aware of. They bring up a point. I don't know that this was necessary in this story, but one of the controlled scientist does say, remember that they actually pumped up the third law so that it's more equal to the second law. And I'm not sure that that's even necessary. I like the fact that the robot wants to do what it's told, but it needs to protect itself. Now, you could say it's good that they pumped up that third law, because the third law does say you need to protect yourself unless it contradicts the first two laws. So if the third law wasn't pumped up, it's possible that Speedy would have just run out there and melted, trying to do what it was told. And then they would have been completely in trouble because Speedy would be dead. There's no way they could ride on the back of these robots and go out to get that specific chemical that they need and come back and put it in their reflectors. They would die because they have to sit on the backs and their suits wouldn't be able to protect them in the direct sunlight. They're only protected really in the shadows. In the direct sunlight, they only have like 20 minutes and they die. So it's good that that third law, I guess, was pumped up so that it's kind of equal to the second law, so that the robot doesn't want to hurt itself, but at the same time, the robot wants to do what it was told. But I do feel a little awkward about it because the way the three laws are laid out, it really sounds like a robot will just go die if it's told to, which is not helpful, right? It should be that the third law protects the robot as long as the robot being protected doesn't hurt a human. Maybe it could have just been rephrased that way instead of just saying, and I know that mathematically or just cleanliness wise, it looks better to say, as long as it doesn't contradict rule number one, as long as it doesn't contradict rule number two. I know it looks very clean, but a little bit more thought, a little bit more imagination, hopefully could have cleaned it up so that it just said, as long as it doesn't hurt a human, as long as it doesn't hurt a human. He should have just gone and killed himself, but they pumped up rule number three because they didn't want him to go kill himself, right? They didn't think it out really cleanly. So, because 3 and 2 are equal, and the robot has been given an order to go hurt itself, but it doesn't want to hurt itself, it's stuck in this weird loop. So that's what they figure out while they're sitting in the shadows. Maybe what they need to do is increase the danger. If they can make 3 outweigh 2 altogether, then the robot will stop caring about the orders it was given, and it will run back to the base because it's so scared. Okay, so they want to increase 3. So they go back down into the tunnels, they run back to the base, they grab this crazy chemical. What they realize is there's volcanic activity which will melt the robot. It's a lot more specific. Isaac Asimov is a lot smarter than I am. If you're into this kind of stuff, definitely check this out. Or if you're thinking to yourself, that's not at all what it says, I apologize, right? uh, I'm glad you know it's cool. But put it in the comments, right? Of course, we can talk about, help me out with the science in this thing, because I like it and I want it, right? But I don't really understand it. There's some kind of chemical. I think it's carbon monoxide, I think is specifically what they say, but I'm not positive. Um, so they run back to the base, they grab a bunch of that stuff, and they run back out and they throw the stuff not at the robot, they throw it kind of behind the robot to drive it toward them. They have to go out in the sun, they chuck the stuff behind the robot, and the robot starts coming towards them because it's afraid of what they threw, right? It can sense that it's going to get damaged. So it starts running towards them. So it's working. So they turn around and they run back to the shadows. But when they get there, Robbie stopped. He didn't continue into the shadows with them and come back to the base. He got far enough away from the chemical that he was safe and he just stopped. Now, of course, they're running out of time. They only have like 1 hour left. They don't have time to go back down the tunnels, grab more of the stuff, come back out, and chuck more of it. They don't have time. So they're really in trouble. And Robbie is not, in fact, Robbie, oh, I keep calling it Robbie, I'm sorry. This is not Robbie the robot, this is Speedy the robot. right? I think his designation is like SDY38 or something like that. And people just call it Speedy because that's kind of what it sounds like. And it runs, right? It's a robot that's built to go fast, and it goes really fast. They can't ride on their robots and chase Speedy and just grab him because Speedy, the big robots go like 4 miles an hour, and Speedy goes like 60 miles an hour. Like it's not even close. They can't catch Speedy. They have to do something else. So Speedy, the robot, is actually starting to slowly move in a circle again. They realize that Speedy is moving around the new area of danger that they've created, where Speedy's safe but still wants to try to go get the chemical he's supposed to go get. So finally, the red-haired guy is like, okay, we're gonna die. This is stupid. The only option we have is to try to trigger order number one. I'm going out in the sun. Maybe I'll take my helmet off. Who knows? He's not going to do that because that's too much. But that's where he's at, right? He's at the point where he realizes he needs to put himself in mortal danger to trigger this robot to come and grab him and save him. That's their only choice at this point. So the other scientist agrees with him, but the other scientist wants to mathematically make sure that it works. And I do not understand what they do here in the story. Maybe you can explain this part to me. He wants to know what 14 cubed is. And I do not understand what that has to do with anything. I'm not sure if he's just testing the other scientist to make sure that the scientist is still in his right mind. But he says, what is 14 cubed? And the other scientist, the red-haired guy, just answers instantly with the right answer. And it's like, well, you got that kind of fast. Like, did you know I was going to do this? The other scientist starts thinking, wow, he predetermined what 14 cubed was. There's no way he worked that out that fast. And that's what makes me feel like it's kind of this weird test to make sure that he's thinking straight and that he's thinking like a scientist. But as he's piecing together that the guy premeditated what 14 cubed was, the red-haired guy they're on their robots. The red-haired guy pushes his robot away and books it out into the sun at 4 miles an hour, as fast as he can book it. Right? So he trucks out into the sun, and the other scientist is like, dang it, I shouldn't follow him because then we'll both just be in danger. I need to be here if this thing works. So he just waits there. The other guy books it out into the sun. He gets as close to Robbie as he can because Robbie's still kind of drunk. Not Robbie, Speedy. Dang it. Speedy is still kind of drunk. And Speedy wants to run from him and play a game. But if he doesn't get too close, Speedy is just sort of pivoting there, right? Right on the edge. And he jumps off his robot and he says, Speedy, you need to save me because I'm frying in the sun. And Speedy quotes some weird thing again. And he says, no, Speedy, I'm dying here. I need you to help me. And he can start to feel the heat kind of boiling him. And he tries to get closer to Speedy. And then all of a sudden, the robot behind him is like, I know I'm not supposed to move when you're not on my back, but you are in danger. And this, I really enjoyed this. I realized that Asimov does all this crazy exposition to get to a very cool part of his story, right? It's you have to wade through this stuff if you're not in the mood for it. And today, I think I was just in the mood for it. I was enjoying the other stuff, But this is where it really gets going. This second robot is like, you're in trouble. I need to help you. But they're far enough away from the sun that this robot can't help him. He only goes 4 miles an hour, right? And I wonder if he could like use his body as a shield, right? And like put him in the shade, kind of, and try to walk back. I'm sure the robot's working through how it's going to try to save this human. But the human's like, no, no, not you, right? That robot can't save him. It has to be Speedy. So he's like, I order you to stop. But the robot just keeps coming because of law number one, right? And Speedy is like on the fence, but right, of course, as he starts to pass out from heat exhaustion, Speedy runs up and grabs him and takes off back towards the shade. Both the robots do. They get back to the shade, and he's totally passed out. They go back to the base, and he wakes up, and he's completely safe. He's completely fine. The robot saved him. Speedy saved him, and the scientist says Speedy's afraid to talk to you because of the fact that he couldn't achieve your mission. And he says, bring Speedy over, tell him to get over here. It wasn't his fault. So they bring Speedy over, and he explains that he didn't give him the sense of urgency that he should have given, and Speedy's okay. And they decide that they'd like to get off Mercury as soon as possible. They were going to go to a space station, and they were going to fight the decision to go to the space station because Mercury was more of a challenge. But the idea of freezing space sounds a lot better to them now than frying Mercury, right? So it's kind of this goofy joke ending, which I do think leads to other stories. These characters are repeated throughout more of the stories. So we'll get more of them later. But I found it very interesting that Speedy was afraid to talk to him. And I think this kind of goes back to some of the Blade Runner stuff we were talking about, which is why in the world would you give them emotions? It doesn't make sense that Speedy's afraid to talk to his master, basically, right? To give them that much emotion is harmful. It doesn't help the mission. It doesn't help science in any way. Um, I find it to be very strange choice, especially a robot whose job it is to run and get things. That doesn't make sense to me. Uh, but I am glad that they don't punish Speedy. I'm glad that the human at least understood that it was his fault. And I love that. That's another thing I've already brought up about Asimov is the idea that computers and robots only do what you tell them. If your computer is acting up, it's your fault, unless, of course, it's broken, right? But I'm taking a lot of programming classes right now, and it's just fascinating to me how important it is to understand that the computer's doing what you told it to do. If your program's not working, it's your fault. You don't know how to talk to it, and that's your fault. And the human understands that. And I love that Asimov understood that, and he was kind of putting that out into the general culture, right? The idea that computers only do what you tell them. And that's fascinating and cool. So I had a lot of fun with this story. I got to admit, there was a lot of exposition. It's not the most brilliantly crafted story, but the ideas are really cool, and I had a lot of fun with it. So I'm glad that I'm doing this. Um, I'd probably give this thing I'd say I'd say a good seven. I'm even going to go an eight, to be honest with you. Heart, of course, is zero. Science is through the roof. It's a 10 plus, right? But I really appreciate the three laws. Obviously, I have to give philosophy for this a 10 straight up. And the awe of the story, the wonder of space, and the wonder of sci-fi. I'm probably going to give this thing like an 8. It's a little disappointing how mundane the answers are, except for the three laws, right? The way the three laws might turn into a contradiction is really fun, right? The way that it could really mess with a robot and make it not do what you think it's going to do because of these steadfast laws. And I know that Asimov goes into a lot of his robot stories are just about the three laws messing up a robot, right? That's kind of the basis of a lot of this stuff. But it's interesting. It's cool, especially if you're coming at it learning programming and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, it was really fascinating. I enjoyed it. So for awe, I'm going to give it like an 8, even though finding out that there's lava over there was the problem with the robot. I wish that the problem with the robot was a lot crazier, right? Like aliens or, who know, it is science fiction, right? It's weird to say the robot's acting up. What's wrong with it? Oh boy, we got in a universe of infinite possibilities. What could it be? Turns out it's lava, right? And I'm being a little bit extreme. Obviously, it's more of a chemical reaction, but still, that was a little bit mundane. But at the same time, it's practical, right? It's almost like this isn't really science fiction. This is just trying to predict what the future is going to be like for us. Because some nut job billionaire is going to say, I want you to go find me the biggest diamond that exists on Mercury so that I can give it to my wife, right? There's going to be some screwy thing. There's going to be people there. They're going to be working with robots to try to mine Mercury for this goofball idiot. These things are going to happen, and maybe we'll actually find something on Mercury that helps humanity. You know, that'll be their driving force, of course. But um, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Surprisingly, I'm surprised. I hate to say it, but I am kind of surprised. It's cool, mostly because I have other entertainment that's taking care of other aspects that I need. Right. So yeah, it was totally good. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.